Okay, this afternoon we welcome Sally Bermanzohn, a board member at the African Roots Center and author of Willow's Secrets. This is Sally's second work of historical fiction. Sally will talk about her inspiration for the book and the creative process for her writing. She will read 2 excerpts, each of which will be followed by a moderated Q&A. Sally has ancestral roots in northern Alabama, where Willow's Secrets takes place. She grew up in New York and in the 1960s went south for college. In North Carolina, she became deeply involved in the movements for civil rights, women's equality, and labor organizing. In 1979, she participated in a demonstration that was attacked by the Ku Klux Klan, who killed 5 people and critically wounded her husband. Years later, Sally earned a PhD at City University of New York and taught at Brooklyn College. She authored Through Survivor's Eyes from the 60s to the Greensboro Massacre and co-edited Violence and Politics, Globalization's Paradox. In retirement, Sally became a novelist. Willow's Secrets is her second work of historical fiction. Her first novel, Indian Annie, A Grandmother's Story, also takes place in 19th century Alabama. A professor emerita, Sally resides with her husband in the Hudson Valley. I'm very pleased to introduce Sally Bermanzohn.
Okay, I guess I have to start talking for the screen to get big. Anyway, my name is Sally Bermanzohn, or Sally B for short. And 30 years ago, my mother took a trip to Alabama where she visited her cousins down there. That Christmas, she told my brother and my sister and myself that we had ancestors who lived in the Chickasaw Nation in the early 1800s, before that land was called Mississippi and Alabama. Ever since that Christmas, and my mother's telling us about that, her trip, I've been reading about Native Americans, especially the Chickasaws, and researching my Alabama ancestors. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, a white man, befriended Chickasaw chiefs and with their permission settled in the Chickasaw Nation. In the 1820s and 30s, he worked with the Chickasaws to oppose Andrew Jackson's Indian removal, the Trail of Tears that forcefully removed Chickasaws, Cherokees, and other nations from their ancestral homeland. Many Native Americans resisted removal, trying to stay in their homelands. Some hid in the hills. Others married into white or Black families. Some mothers, fearing their little ones would not survive the forced march to Oklahoma, left their babies with non-Indian families who were willing to take them. I learned that my great-grandmother was adopted. I tried to imagine what her life was like. How would she tell her own story? The result is a novel of historical fiction called Willow's Secrets. I'm going to read 2 parts of this book, and maybe a short third part if we have enough time. And there'll be a Q&A after each part. So as you have questions, you can write them in the chat at any point. And Troy Ellen will moderate that chat. Okay. I'm going to read from the first chapter, which the title of the chapter is called Cocoon. How do I tell the story of my life? Start at the beginning, my friends tell me as they recall memories when they were 2 or 3 years old. But I can't bring to mind anything when I was that young. My first memory is hiding behind my mama's long skirts. and playing peekaboo with Grandpa. Then Mama fell down and she said, "You knocked me over. You're a strong little 5-year-old." That was a long time ago. I didn't know that I had been taken in by Mama and Grandpa. I didn't know what happened to my birth mother. Now I'm almost 40 years old and I'm learning about my birth family. I'm in a storytelling circle, learning how to tell the story of my life. I remember Mama's bed. I slept there when I was small. I often cried at night and Mama had me sleep with her so that she could comfort me. We lived in the woods on a small farm, and sometimes at night we heard coyotes howl. They scared me. Mama said, "The coyotes are just talking to each other. They won't hurt us." One dark night, Mama and I were both fast asleep. Suddenly, there was a loud knocking at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I slipped out of bed and ran into the living room to see what was happening. I saw Grandpa in his nightshirt grabbing his double-barreled shotgun off the hooks high on the living room wall. Then Grandpa shoved his foot hard on the front door to open it and pointed his gun at whoever was knocking. I never saw who was there because Mama pulled me back in the bedroom. "Don't you ever run out of this room if you hear a noise in the night," she said. "It's Grandpa's job to protect us, and he can't do it if you're running around." I cried because I was scared, and then Mama hugged me. "You're almost too big for lullabies," she said, and it was true. But she sang one anyway, and I fell asleep. The next morning, Grandpa told me that when he heard knocking, he mustered his gun in case someone was intending to harm us. But the man at the door was just a traveler looking for a place to sleep with a roof over his head. Grandpa pointed to the shacks across the road that were for travelers. I remember celebrating my 6th birthday party. Mama baked a cake and she and Grandpa sang, "Happy birthday, dear Willow." Grandpa and Mama made a bedroom in the pantry right off the kitchen just for me. It had a small window that looked out into the backyard where I could watch the moon at night. I heard noises of all shapes and sizes. Most of them were not worth fretting over, but not all. Grandpa's soldierly response to a knock at the door gave me the notion that some noises might be signs of danger. I have lots of memories after I turned 6, like going to the barn with Grandpa every morning to feed our cow and the chickens, the cats, the donkeys, and Grandpa's Palomino horse, whose name was Pal. I remember Mama cooking. She loved her cast iron skillet more than anything in the world. Sometimes I would sneak pieces of her cornbread when she wasn't looking. When I was young, I thought Mama was my mother and Grandpa was my grandfather. When I was older, Mama told me I had a different birth mother who died when I was very little. After my birth mother died, Mama and Grandpa took me in and raised me. Mama said she didn't want to tell me this sad story, but I asked so many questions. I wanted to know everything. Mama and Grandpa weren't sure when I was born. Was it 1866 or 1867 or 1868? It was one of those hard, starving years after the Civil War. They simply took me in and told everyone I was Mama's child. As I grew, Mama and Grandpa wanted to celebrate my birthday. So they chose March 1st, 1867, and every year on that date, Mama baked a cake and we celebrated. Looking back, I realized how patient Mama and Grandpa were with me. I was full of energy and always asking questions. I loved Mama, but we were very different. She stayed in the house and I liked to be outside. When she wasn't cooking, she sat in the living room and sewed. I never sat for long. When I asked Mama questions, she usually ignored me. Sometimes she looked so unhappy, and I felt like she was looking right through me. When Mama got sad, I got sad. I wanted to fly away. I loved Grandpa because he was fun and he taught me things. He told me stories about when he was a boy. He said his best friends were Chickasaw Indian boys who lived here. That was a long, long time ago, when this was Chickasaw country, before the Americans forced the Indians to leave their home. Grandpa listened to my questions, and most of the time he answered them. If I asked a hard question, he would take hours or days before responding to me. When I complained about him taking too long, he told me to be patient. Grandpa wanted to teach me to read, and he got angry at me when I couldn't sit still. When he was angry or Mama was sad, I went to my secret hideout. I found this hideout one day when I was exploring the hill behind our cornfield, way back behind our house. I saw a rocky ledge that jutted out near the top of the hill. The hill under the ledge was too steep for me to climb, so I walked around to the side of the hill where the slope was not so steep. I climbed through the woods up to the hilltop and found a way out to that ledge. There I could sit on the rocks, feel the wind, and imagine I was flying. Up, up, and away, away from Mama and Grandpa. I felt like I was up there with the birds. "Where do you go," asked Grandpa, "when you disappear for hours at a time?" We were sitting in the kitchen while Mama fixed victuals. "To my secret hideout," I told him. "No one knows where it is. I want to live up there." When it came to food, Mama could be loud and opinionated. "Hogwash," she said, about my idea of living in my hideout. "How will you eat?" "I'll come here for meals." "Not in this house," she said. "You have to help around here if you want to eat." "How will you sleep?" asked Grandpa with respect, or maybe skepticism. "I'll make a soft bed out of leaves." "How will you stop the bears and snakes from hurting you?" he asked, mocking me in his tone of wonder. "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." "You got it all figured out," muttered Grandpa, "except for eating and staying safe." One day, after chores, I went to my hideout and stayed for hours. It rained and I got cold, but I stayed anyway. Then I got hungry and came home. Mama and Grandpa were angry at me. "I rang the cowbell for you and you didn't come. We waited dinner for you," Mama said. "Grandpa sent me to bed without supper." But later, when Grandpa wasn't looking, Mama brought soup and bread to my bedroom. "Thank you, Mama," I said. The soup tasted great and I knew Mama loved me. The next day, Grandpa told me that he and Mama had written down rules that I had to follow to eat and sleep in this house. I remember them because Grandpa read those rules over and over. Years later, when I finally learned how to write sentences, he made me copy the rules and tape them to my bedroom door. Rules of this house. 1, be in the house before meals to set the table. 2, clean up after meals, wash and dry dishes and put them away. 3, do your chores. Feed the chickens, weed the cornfield and vegetable garden. 4, work with all of us during the planting and the harvest. 5, always be home before it gets dark. 6, come home immediately whenever you hear Mama's cowbell. 7, respect your mother and grandfather. Years later, as an adult, I appreciated Mama and Grandpa more than I can say. They loved me and they were strict but patient. They never hit or hurt me. Their rules were good ones. We lived in the country, surrounded by hills and woods and meadows. No one lived near us except for the family that lived next door. They were the Henrys, Ms. Mildred and her husband, Mr. Henry, and their daughter, Molly. They were our best friends. Mama and Miss Mildred grew up together, and they each married good men. Miss Mildred had a girl child she named Molly, and Mama had me. Molly and I were best friends, even though Molly was 6 years older than me. I did not realize until years later that Molly and her folks were colored. Molly taught me lots of things, especially about plants and animals. One summer day, she showed me a twig on the bush that had a hard, dark thing on it. I thought the dark thing was a dry leaf. It's not a leaf, said Molly. It's a cocoon. What's a cocoon? I asked her. It's a safe little place for a tiny little creature. We will watch this twig every day to see what happens to the cocoon. We check the cocoon every day. One morning, I saw something try to struggle out of it. I ran to get Molly, and we both sat there watching it. Then a beautiful butterfly crawled out of the cocoon. The butterfly sat near the cocoon for a while. It's drying its wings, said Molly. Then it gracefully flew away to Mama's flower bed. And that's the end of that reading.
Thank you, Sally. That was beautiful. We do have a couple of comments and questions. The first question is from Sarah Elizabeth. Did you have any idea you may be Native before your mother told you?
No, I did not. And I still don't know, because even though I know my great-grandmother was adopted, and I know that they are very closely tied with Native Americans and have been, that family's been marrying Native Americans ever since then. You know, I don't know exactly what the ancestry of my great-grandmother is, but I imagined it. And so it's all been something that's been part of my life for 30 years, not all of my life.
Thank you. We have a comment from Carol saying, my father said our Native connection was too far back to count when I was young. Later on, my aunt, my dad's sister, shared that it was their grandmother who was Native American.
Right. Say, because a lot of people hid their Native American roots. It was very, now people are proud of it for the most part. But back then, people were not. It was something to be hidden.
Sam Avery.
Yes.
What is the sociological significance of the cowbell?
When Sam, my little brother, who's about a foot taller than I am, when we were growing up, our mother had a cowbell, and that's how she called us back to the house. So that's its sociological significance. I mean, I think it's part of farming. You know, you have cows wear cowbells so that if they wander off, you can hear where they are. And so cowbells are kind of like used for other things too, like calling your kids back home. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, that's how I remember it too.
Okay, we have a comment from, and I always mispronounce this name, I'm sorry, Etiqua.
Oh, Etiqua. Hi, Etiqua.
Etiqua says her mother denied it because you could get killed.
Yeah.
By the Native heritage.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was a fear thing. I mean, in the South, among my cousins back there, that they were fearful you would get removed. You would be sent to Oklahoma, which wasn't much better than getting killed. because, you know, it was pretty wild, pretty rough out there. And if you were separated from your family, it was a bad thing. And that's what people were very fearful about and hid their native connection.
Another question from Sarah Elizabeth. Are there still settlements like this one in the hills in Alabama?
There may be, well, okay, I mean, there are two things. The Willow Secrets, this family that was basically a white family that adopted this little girl and who had, you know, colored neighbor next door. Actually, that house is still standing, the house that Willow lived in. But as far as the hidden Indian villages, like I described in Indian Annie, they may be there. I have met a number, I've been down there 4 times, and I've met a number of Native people who are now very proud of their Native heritage, but also don't share it about their friends who are also Native. And in fact, I have a book by one man, he just says, you know, that there are known to be, he knows of 5 Chickasaw families who still live there, but they are still they still hide who they are.
Interesting. Betsy Lowe asks, did you try ancestry.com, I guess, in terms of that? And also with a follow-up, why do you think your mom waited so long to share this with you?
Okay, good questions. I did a lot of genealogical research through ancestry.com and actually also in the library, the state library, Alabama State Library in Montgomery, Alabama. And really that was the state library that I found out more information. But it was really just about the white men, the great grandfather and his son. Those are the only ones that I could find out any information on. All the women, all the people who might have had, you know, who had Native ancestry, I couldn't find out anything about them, you know, except through my cousins. And what was the other question? It was about.
Why did your mother take so long?
Oh, why did my mother take? Okay, that actually, this is my 2nd book of historical fiction, and I have another one that I've been writing, which is about my grandfather. It's about my mother's father, who split up, had a bad divorce from his wife, and it was hidden who he was. And I grew up thinking he was terrible and he had died a long time ago and all kinds of horrible stuff about him. And it turned out he lived till I was 10 years old. And so it was only as an adult that my mother told me anything about him, really. And so that's why these mysteries, that's why these secrets that continue in my family have plagued my imagination so much. So I think it was my mother went through a very painful childhood because of the divorce between her parents. And I just think she didn't want to talk about it.
Thank you. Etiquette has written 600 Cherokee were discovered in the mountains in Tennessee in the 1990s. Do you know about that?
Well, I know that there are a lot of Cherokees who still live in North Carolina in the mountains of Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And in fact, North Carolina has, at least this is what I've read, has a higher percentage of Cherokee and Native American population than any other East Coast state. Now, I've read that. I don't know how true it is, but there are people who live that all this time in the mountains, pretty isolated.
Probably trying to just stay away and stay alive,
Right.
likely.
I mean, now there's a flourishing of Cherokee culture and same with a lot of Native American up here as well as down there and across the country. And so people are coming out, but a lot of especially older people, pretty much they want to stay just where they are and keep their privacy.
Okay, we have another question from Leola.
Mhm.
Did they, your grandmother and grandfather, even divorce, or did she just take the kids and run away from him?
Well, she did both. She took the kids and ran away from him. And then I got this through my uncle, my mother's younger brother, that he came after them to Atlanta. My grandmother took her two children to Atlanta and to her parents' house. And my grandfather went there and tried to visit them. And my grandmother told him that they were divorced. She was the one got the divorce. And the only way that he could see them is if he paid, what is alimony? What is it? What do you pay for child support? And he was very poor at the time. He had gotten fired from his job and he didn't have any money. And so basically she cut him off from seeing his children. So you can imagine that's going to be in the next book.
And when is the next book going to be published?
Well, I'm still writing it. It's pretty much, I have a good draft of it, but I have a lot of work to do on it. So 2021.
Okay, gives us something to look forward to.
Yeah.
I have a question from Sandy.
Yeah, the whole family's.
Did your cousins have any lore or tales about your grandfather's side of the story?
Several went, well, I grew up hearing all these horrible things about him. And that's what my brother heard and my sister heard. And that's what we grew up with. And when I went down to Alabama, of course, I asked my cousin, who's my age, about it. And he vaguely remembered our grandfather when he was very sick, the last couple of years of his life. But then I met some of his older cousins, who are also cousins of mine, who knew our grandfather when he came back and lived with them in northern Alabama. And they loved him. They said he was great. He would take them places, that he was real smart, that he knew about weather, and he would teach them things. And I mean, it was like, whoa, this was so different than what I had grown up with. And it changed my whole orientation it made me really want to seek out this grandfather and think about him and imagine what he went through.
Interesting. I guess they always say there are two sides to every story.
That's right.
So there don't seem to be any more questions or comments on
Okay.
this passage. So would you like to continue with the second reading, Sally?
Yes, I would.
Okay, wait,
Oh, the second.
wait, here comes another one.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
Were you interested in your family history prior to your mom's story? I ask because I've become interested since my dad was adopted. And this is from Betsy Lowe.
Oh, okay. Hi, Betsy. I mean, I was interested. I think what made me really interested, because I mean, I didn't know much. We didn't actually. When we were growing up, we found out something about my father's background and everything. But what really sparked my interest in this was the Native American connection, and also the fact that the only people that I could find out any information about were the white men. And so it just meant that the women and the people of color just weren't worthy of anything in the history books, you know, or in anything, any information that was passed on in a library. So that made me really, really interested in it.
Thank you. Sarah Elizabeth has another question. How does your family deal with the story now?
Well, I must say that my brother, who's on the chat with us, and my sister have been tremendously supportive in this, and they've read drafts and read books, and I feel like it's been a shared thing. Oh, okay. So my family, yeah. So unfortunately, both my mother and my father have passed. My uncle is still alive. He's 98 years old, and he's read both Indian Annie and Willow Secrets, and he's really been very supportive and wants to know what the next book's going to be about. And I'm going to share drafts with him about that. It's about his father, and he's been a source of quite a bit of the information and about the character of his father, who was an admirable man, an admirable poor man who really got screwed. So I feel like that's been pretty good. And then also both my daughters are on this chat and my grandsons. So I feel like the family is wonderfully supportive and interested in it.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Let's go to the second reading, and people can continue to put comments and questions into the chat.
Okay. All right, so this is a selection from chapter 2, and the title of the chapter is The Same Underneath. Both Molly's family and my family were poor. My family owned 20 acres of land, and the Henrys also owned 20 acres of land next to us. Having some land meant we could grow our own food. Our two families shared the barn that housed our animals, the woodshed where we stored wood, the well that provided both families with good drinking water. Our two families worked together to plant and harvest our cornfields. Fall was always the busiest time of year because that's when we harvested and preserved most of our crops. We had a routine. Mama always cooked us a big breakfast of scrambled eggs, grits, and cornbread. Then our two families sat around our big living room table to eat. We are two small families, but together we have 5 people who can work the harvest while Mama Rose cooks meals for us, said Grandpa. Then Mr. Henry, winking at Molly and me, said, "Who needs sons? We don't, because we have such strong, hardworking daughters." "Where shall we start, Mr. Henry?" Grandpa said. This was a joke because we always started in the Henry's cornfield. Their cornfield was in the shade in the early morning, and our cornfield was shaded in the late afternoon. Grandpa said, "The more work you can do in the shade, the better." We worked in teams. One team was Miss Mildred and her husband, Mr. Henry. Another was Molly and me. Grandpa worked by himself. As we walked down the rows of corn, we cut off all the big ripe cobs and left the smaller cobs on the stalks. We would harvest those cobs a week or so later when they were ripe. And we always left some cobs for the crows and the critters. By mid-morning, we were working in the hot sun. When Mama rang the cowbell for lunch, we were always relieved. We stopped by our pond where we cooled off by splashing our sweaty faces and bodies. Mama had a good lunch ready on the picnic table under the shade of the big oak tree. She fixed deviled eggs one day, potato salad the next, and always cornbread and cold tea. Before we ate, Mama gave the blessing. Thank you, God, for this beautiful land that provides us with food. In Jesus' name, amen. Then we would eat and relax for a while. Often the grown-ups stayed at the table talking, while Miley and I would lie under the willow tree and fall asleep. I remember one day when Mr. Henry said something that kept me at the picnic table. The way we work together reminds me of the ways of the Choctaw Indians, he said. Each family would have their own kitchen garden, and the village had big fields of corn, squash, pumpkins, beans, and sunflowers. The whole village worked together to harvest the big fields, just like we do here. Mr. Henry sighed. In a way, our two families are like a little Choctaw village. Are you an Indian, Mr. Henry? I asked him. I had heard Grandpa talk about the Chickasaw Indians who used to live here. But as far as I knew, I had never met an Indian. Can you keep a secret? Mr. Henry said, glancing at me with a serious look. Yes, I said. Okay then, whispered Mr. Henry. My mother was a Choctaw Indian and my father was African. I will tell you my story if you promise to keep it secret and never tell anybody. I nodded my head, saying, I'm good at keeping secrets. When I was young, Mr. Henry said, the government rounded up the Choctaws and the other Indian tribes around here in the South and forced them to go west to Indian territory called Oklahoma. No one wanted to leave their homeland, but the soldiers had lots of guns. I was still little, Mr. Henry continued, his face sad. My cousin took me with him to the city of Mobile. While I was away from my mother, the soldiers came and took the Choctaws. I never saw my mother again. After that, I couldn't be a Choctaw anymore, even though I was born and raised Choctaw. Ever since the Indian removal law, being an Indian is illegal here in the South. If I said I was Choctaw, they could send me out west. So I became a colored man of African descent. While Mr. Henry was talking, I looked at each of us. Mr. Henry's wife, Mildred, had dark brown skin. Mr. Henry was also brown, but lighter than his wife. Molly's color was in between her parents. Then I looked at Grandpa. He always wore a hat, and his face stayed beige, but his arms were very tan from working in the sun. Then I looked at my own brown arms and saw that my skin was much darker than Grandpa's, but lighter than Mr. Henry's. Mama's skin was the lightest of all because she hardly ever left the house. A few days later, when I was alone with Grandpa, I talked to him about skin colors of our two families. Grandpa said, "You make some interesting observations, but many folks see it differently. They consider you and me and Mama to be white, and Molly, Mildred, and Henry to be colored." Why? I asked. Because the Alabama government believes in the separation of the races. In fact, the whole South and much of the rest of this country tries to separate people by color. They make laws about it. That doesn't make sense, I said. You're right, said Grandpa. We are all the same underneath our skins. And the way we work and live with the Henrys shows that people can get along if they want to. And that's the end of this reading.
Thank you, Sally. We have a question from Betsy. What age, it's actually, I'll read the whole thing. What age do you think your book is geared to? It appears that it's young adult. And then writes, I'm ignorant regarding relationships among natives and Blacks. Can you speak more to what that looked like during that time frame? And did it remain, or was dimensioned through the years? So the first part is, the age group that you're,
Okay.
and then I'll repeat the second part.
Okay. I think that it's appropriate for a young adult. I also wrote it for a general audience. I wrote it for adults as well as young adults. So that's the end. That's as much as I can say about that.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat the second part of the question, Sally?
That would be helpful.
Okay. It's about relationships among natives and Blacks. Can you speak more to what that looked like during that time frame? And did it remain the same, or was it dimensioned through the year? I guess, did it evolve through the years?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a very, very big question that's been the subject of more research. There was a lot when back in the day, even before the 1800s, back in the 1700s and before that, when I mean, it's a very complicated question because it has to do with the history of Native Americans who were slaughtered and really pushed out for their homes, as soon as during the colonialism. And then African people were enslaved and brought across the ocean to work. And so there was a lot of interconnection between Native and African. And I think naturally people got along. There've been studies, there are books about African Indians and Africans. I have some in my bookcase over here. There's one book called Black Indians, and I can't remember the author, but I can. William Loren Katz. William Loren Katz. That's a very good book, Black Indians, about the interrelationships. I would recommend that book. Sometimes they were, and so in every state, there are different histories, there are different laws. The whole segregation things sometimes made distinctions between Black and Indian, every different state has a different laws and different distinctions that are all pretty ridiculous, trying to rank people in terms of their race. It's a long history, and now there have been part of the flourishing of Native culture has in part brought together Black and Native. I have a very good friend who's African American in North Carolina, a leader in things that we were involved in down there. And when I first interviewed him back in the 1990s, he told stories about being jealous of a little childhood friend he had because that little boy his family was, they became Indian, and he was kind of like, he saw him as just another colored kid who, suffered from what colored kids suffer from. And he was like, so when did you become an Indian? So he saw it as being like a step above being African American. And but now, I mean, one of the things that's been interesting about him is now he's very interested in the culture, the flourishing of Native culture in North Carolina. So that just gives you a little sense of it. There's another book, another person who talks about this a lot is Erie Dixon, who is of Native and African descent. And so he's another source. He lives near here, and he gives talks about this.
Thank you. Ethekwa made a comment. There were also free Africans who traded with the Native Americans in many regions of the country.
That's right.
Sorry, and then there's a question, approximately how many people, this is from Sarah Elizabeth, approximately how many people were removed to Oklahoma?
Oh, boy. Wow, that's a good question that I'm sure I could look up in a book and find out, but they were thousands, because they were the 5 major tribes in the Southeast, plus other tribes and smaller tribes in the Southeast, and other tribes from other parts of the country. So there were really thousands and thousands of people who were removed, and a lot of them forced to walk by soldiers forcing them to walk there.
Yes. Such a wonderful part of our history.
Yeah.
Question from Betsy. Who was the author of Black Indians?
William
Lauren Katz.
Lauren Katz, K-A-T-Z
Okay,
is the last
thank
name.
you. Sally has a comment and a question. Very touched by the shared barn and the community work. Do you think that culture continues in that area, communal work?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it's no longer, the farming in Alabama now takes place on the, in the flatlands where the big plantations were. And there are also a lot of small farms down there. There isn't as much farming up in the hills as there was. But I think in farming cultures, amongst where there's small farms, that people did, the whole story about barn raising, when you needed to build a barn, all your neighbors got together to pitch in to help it. And so I think that there is a communal culture, has been historically, and in some places continues.
It should continue because it is,
Right,
it's important to support people in community.
right.
Oh, Sarah Elizabeth made the comment, not unlike the separation of families today
Yeah, really.
and the 545 children
Yes.
who don't know where their parents are.
Right, and it's the same kind of selfish greed that's doing that today that was doing that back in the day. How to make money off of people's labor, or how to decide whether, people where they should be. And it's just the same kind of terrible attitude, terrible values that that exist today and existed back then.
Yes, I'm just going to give it another minute to see if any more questions or comments pop into the chat. I know, Sally, you said that you might have a third reading.
I have a very short third reading, which has to do with the influence of Frederick Douglass. So I thought that would be a nice way to end it.
Okay, why don't you go with that? And there'll probably be some questions after that reading as well.
Okay. This is just a short section in chapter 15 called Molly's Birmingham. When Molly turned 14, she told me that she was old enough to make up her own mind, and she wanted to leave Pine Hill, where we lived. She argued with her parents all the time. Her hero was Frederick Douglass, whose book she had read cover to cover. When Frederick Douglass sees something wrong, Molly said, he gives speeches. We celebrated Molly's 14th birthday at the Henry's house. Miss Mildred roasted a chicken and potatoes, and Mama baked a chocolate birthday cake. We enjoyed the delicious dinner and were getting ready to eat cake when Molly stood up. I turned 14 today, she said, and that means I am pretty much grown. Dramatically, she looked at each of us. I love you all, but I want to get out of this place. Molly, sit down, ordered Mr. Henry, her father. It's my birthday, protested Molly, ignoring her father. Like Frederick Douglass, I'm going to have my say. Raising her voice, Molly looked at her father. Do you know we are the only Negro people for miles around? Most of our family left here along with all the other colored folks. They went to cities like Birmingham and Chicago. I wished we had moved there, out of here. Molly took a deep breath. There is nothing in this place for me. I can't go to school, can't go to the library, can't go here, can't go there. I can't go anywhere except on Sunday when we travel hours down to our colored church. That's the only time I have fun. Molly turned and looked at me and my folks saying, I love you, Willow and Grandpa and Ms. Rose. But all the other folks around here hate colored people. You know how they do. And I hate them back. Molly put her hand on Grandpa's shoulder. Thank you, Grandpa, for borrowing that Pine Hill Public Library book for me called Birmingham, City of Progress. That book taught me a lot. I learned that white people don't think there are any colored people in Birmingham. That book is full of drawings of people building this and leading that. None of them are colored except for one maid serving her master his dinner. Anyone with eyesight can see that there are lots of colored people in Birmingham. My cousins go to schools and libraries in Birmingham that are just for the colored. I want to stay down there with them, but Mama and Papa won't let me. Molly's parents looked shocked. My mama had a funny look on her face. Grandpa stood up saying, coming of age is hard for youngins, and perhaps even harder for their parents. We're going to leave you all to sort this one out. Grandpa took my hand and we followed Mama back to our house, leaving that chocolate cake untouched, sitting there on the table. That's that. That's it.
Wow. Any questions, anybody? Are Molly and her family real people?
Oh, okay. Well, they're based on real people. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that. I do know that there were, that up in the hills of Alabama, that there are very few Black people. Because it's basically an area of poor white farmers. And so, and the other thing is that after the Civil War, a lot of people left Alabama and the other parts of the South, heading north, or a lot of people moved into Birmingham, became, you know, is now, I think 2/3 Black people population. And that, after the war, when slavery was supposed to be over, people really left the plantations and came to the big cities where they could get industrial jobs, which Birmingham became a big industrial power. And also they left and came up to the northern cities. The migration was huge. And that's what Molly is wanting to do, because there and there still are, I'm sure, pockets of Black families throughout the rural areas. But so I imagine it being pretty isolating for somebody like Molly, especially because segregation was in such force in those days.
Thank you. Sandy, your daughter,
Yes.
has made this comment. I love how these books are not only interesting and engaging, but steeped in historical knowledge. I agree with Sandy on that point.
Thank you.
How do you do your research, Sally?
Well, I've always been interested in history, American history, and especially the 1800s. I don't know why I felt drawn to that, but because I think I've always been interested in like social movements and, you know, rights and stuff. And there are so many, you know, the abolitionist movement started in the 1800s, the first women's rights, you know, started then. The union movement started then, and I've been fascinated with the 1800s, and so I have kind of that base, and then I've just delved into Native American history, especially in the last decades, and then, you know, particularly Alabama. I just read a lot about it. Anyway, I love it. I mean, that's what I think. I find it fascinating.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know that I took this time to put in the chat information about how you would be able to purchase this book if you're interested. And I'll just say it very briefly while others may be coming up with some more comments or questions. Sally's book, Indian Annie and Willow's Secret, are available online at inquiringbooks.com. That's inquiringbooks.com. They're also available in store at Inquiring Minds Bookstore and wrong thing. It's not a coffee house, even though it says that on their website.
It will be.
But they're located in New Paltz and Saugerties. And as I said, the addresses are in the chat.
Also, I'll just say that it is available also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But I'm really, really thrilled that it's in local bookstores and that they have an online service. So it's really like, you know, you can go buy your books, whatever books they carry, you can buy online. So I'm very excited about that.
Does anybody else have questions or comments for Sally? Leola is applauding.
Well, I got a good family.
Joseph Wilson is applauding.
No kidding. Hey, Joe.
Sally Anderson is applauding. You know what? If everybody, and Sandy is applauding, everybody want to just
Betty.
on their video so Sally can see you?
Oh, what a great group. What a wonderful group. Hi there. And they're my grandsons, my daughter. There's Joe, a colleague from Brooklyn College. Sam, my brother. Karen. Anyway, Betty, we can't see her face. Carol. Itakwa. Great. Odell, hey, Odell. Oh, well, it says the host won't show our videos. Okay.
The host won't show your videos? Hold on a moment. I have to go through, I guess, and ask you to start video.
So let me just say that people, as you come up with questions or anything, feel free to get to email me at Sally BEEBEE thankful at Gmail. And it's been a great experience, and I really thank you guys for tuning in. Great.
Okay.
You baby.
Oh, hi there, Coleman and Avery and Santos. There's my grandsons in there.
Hi, baby.
Hi,
When's the Netflix coming out?
guys. Don't I wish? You set it up, Joe. I'll do it.
It would make a great movie.
Well, anybody, any suggestions? Any movie maker, pass it along. Anyway. But it's great to see you got everybody. Oh, there's Itaqua and Rev Deli. Cool. And Betty, hi Betty, my neighbor in Brooklyn. Cool. Hi Betsy, great questions. And Sarah's been a big help. Okay.
I think, yeah, your book here, I'm Sally's brother. And it seems to me that this book and others that Sally has written are introducing us to a new age that we're moving into. We've been gradually moving into for decades and centuries, but eventually we're going to realize that being human is much greater than being a kind of human. And that may sound trite, but it's absolutely true. And we can't survive on this earth without a spiritual understanding of that reality. We are all human beings. We are types of human beings, but more importantly, we're human. And I think Sally brings that out in her books.
Thank you, Sam. And Sam is also a writer. He's published a bunch of books, and he's an environmental activist who, one of the things that I've learned from Native culture is that we're all related. We're related to all the animals, all the people. We're related to all the critters, from the bugs to the beasts, to the rocks, the trees. And so it's not even limited to human, but we're part of this whole earth. And that's why it's so important that we protect our earth and move away from this kind of digging up and polluting and climate catastrophe and all that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, that's my brother. So look for Sam Avery books also. He just got one out about the carbon. Give it the name of that, Sam.
It's called The Carbon Boycott.
Right, The Carbon Boycott. So anyway.
It's not as good as Sally's book, though. So buy hers first. And if you really like it, then you can look for mine.
No, he's a good one. He did one on the traveling down the whole, help me out, Sam. The whole
The route of the Keystone XL pipeline.
The XL pipeline, where he followed all the way down and talked to the activists, including a very effective Cherokee woman who was a big activist in
Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma, right? She was in Oklahoma, and so he's also, kindred spirit, and we're also related,
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I think this was wonderful, and I had a good time. And I want to thank you, Sally, for a wonderful program. It's very interesting with the reading and with the history that you provided, and the way you, just in those 3 excerpts, sort of brought things to life and to light also. So we really appreciate that. And I encourage you to go to the African Roots Center Facebook page or the website, africanrootslibrary.org, to find out. We have upcoming programs in November. We have Nick Miles on November 7th at 4 p.m. He'll be giving us an interesting take on Christopher Columbus. And also we have a presentation by Rev Deli coming up at the latter part of the month, November 28th. And she will be sharing Daughter of the Tree. I don't have the full title in front of me, but it's
Well, she's right here. You can,
but it's about Sojourner Truth as a child. So I would encourage all of you to please check out our website or our Facebook page so you can find out about upcoming programs. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sally.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Hi, Avery.
Bye.
Hi, Coleman.
I
He's
love
coming.
you.
I love you too.
See Aunt Leola?
Thank you, guys. Yeah, there's Aunt Leola. It's an art in the with her. She's
Bye.
painting outside.
Mhm.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Betty. Hi, Mom. I love you. You're awesome.
I love you too.
Hi,
Great
Leola.
job.
Where's Uncle Sam?
Hi, Itaquah and Rev Deli. Looking forward to your program, Rev Deli.
I think Avery's missing his BB.
Oh, I miss my grandsons. It's so hard. This pandemic is not fun.
We were out.
Well, I guess we ought to sign off. Love
You
you
did
guys.
great, Mom. You did great. That was awesome.
Thank you. I had fun. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for coming and really good questions. So
Thank you, Sally. Bye.
bye, bye, bye,
Bye.
bye, bye,
Bye.
bye, bye.